I'll never forget that fateful camping trip. It was supposed to be a weekend of chilling and fun with my friends, but it turned into a nightmare that I'll never be able to shake. We had all been planning the trip for weeks, and the anticipation was killing us. Finally, the day arrived and we set off early in the morning, excited to get to our campsite and start setting up. As we drove through the winding mountain roads, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The dense trees seemed to close in on us, and the overcast sky made the forest feel even more oppressive. But I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just my nerves getting the best of me. When we arrived at the campsite, we were greeted by a serene lake and a clearing surrounded by tall trees. It was the perfect spot for a peaceful weekend of camping. We set up our tents and started a fire, and everything seemed to be going well. But as the night began to fall, I started to feel a strange presence. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, and I began to hear strange noises coming from the woods around us. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but as the night went on, the noises only grew louder and more persistent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting for us. As the night went on, the noises only grew louder and more persistent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting for us. My friends seemed oblivious to the strange occurrences, and I didn't want to ruin the trip by bringing it up. So, I just tried to ignore it and go to sleep. But sleep didn't come easy. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the rustling of leaves and twigs snapping. I tossed and turned, trying to find a comfortable position, but it was no use. Eventually, I just lay there wide awake, staring up at the tent ceiling and praying for the morning to come. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the sun began to rise and the noises stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that whatever was out there had finally left us alone. I fell into a fitful sleep, exhausted from the long, sleepless night. When I woke up, my friends were already up and about, preparing breakfast. They seemed completely unaware of the strange occurrences from the night before, and I decided not to bring it up. Maybe I had just been imagining things. But as the day went on, the strange occurrences only continued. I kept catching glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, and I heard the same rustling and snapping noises that I had heard the night before. And then there were the voices. Soft whispers coming from the trees, taunting me and telling me to leave. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in these woods, and that whatever was out there did not have our best interests at heart. As the day went on, the strange occurrences only continued. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone in these woods, and that whatever was out there did not have our best interests at heart. I tried to keep it to myself, not wanting to ruin the trip for my friends, but it was getting harder and harder to ignore. That night, I barely slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the rustling and snapping of leaves and the soft whispers taunting me. I was on edge, waiting for something to happen. Nothing was happening at first, but in the dead of the night when I couldn't open my eyes any longer, I thought I heard a voice. It was very faint, but after a while I could hear it louder and louder. To my horror, when the voice was close enough, I could hear what it was saying. It was saying my name, repeating it over and over again. It then came right up to my tent and repeated my name. I held my breath, afraid that if I let out a gasp, it might hear me. Then I could hear tapping on my tent. After a while, the tapping stopped. I let out a huge breath of relief, and when I grabbed my phone to turn it on, the light illuminated the top mesh of my tent, and my heart almost stopped. A face was looking down at me from it, smiling. The face didn't move at all, as if it was just a statue. I didn't want to take a close look at the face, but somehow my eyes couldn't move away from it. The face was a bluish color, and one of the eyeball was hanging down by a vein, lightly swaying in the wind. Then it blinked and then the face went back out of sight. I didn't sleep a wink at all that night. In the morning, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I told my friends about the strange noises and movements I had been experiencing, and they finally believed me. We all agreed that it was time to pack up and leave. As we gathered our things and packed up the car, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. but we didn't see or hear anything else as we left the campsite. Finally, after what felt like the longest drive of my life, we arrived back home. I was relieved to be back in the safety of civilization, and I vowed never to go camping again. That trip had been a nightmare, and I never wanted to experience anything like it again. It was a dark and stormy night, the kind of night where you just want to curl up in your warm bed and forget about the outside world. But my friends and I were determined to go camping, despite the ominous weather. It had been a long day of hiking through the dense forest, and we were all ready to set up camp and get some rest. But as we searched for a good spot to pitch our tent, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Despite our reservations, we decided to set up camp anyway. We were exhausted and figured it was just our imagination getting the best of us. But as the night went on, strange noises started to fill the air. Twigs snapped, leaves rustled, and we could hear the sound of something moving through the brush. At first, we tried to brush it off as just animals scurrying around. But as the noises grew louder and more persistent, we began to feel uneasy. My friend suggested we call it a night and go back home, but we all knew it was too late for that. As the storm raged on, the noises outside became more and more frightening. We could hear growls and snarls, and we knew that whatever was out there wasn't just an animal. We huddled together in the tent, too afraid to even peek outside. And then, just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, we heard the sound of something scratching at the tent. We held our breath, hoping and praying that whatever it was would just go away. But the scratching only grew louder, and we knew it was only a matter of time before it broke through. As the hours ticked by, the scratching and growling continued. We were too terrified to even move, let alone try to escape. We were completely at the mercy of whatever was lurking outside. But as dawn began to break, the noises finally stopped. We waited, holding our breath, until we were sure it was safe to emerge from the tent. When we finally peeked outside, we were greeted by a scene of destruction. Our campsite had been completely destroyed, with all of our supplies scattered about. And there was no sign of whatever had caused all of the chaos. We packed up as quickly as we could and fled the campsite, never looking back. We never spoke of that night again, but the memory of that terrifying experience stayed with us forever. I had been planning my camping trip for weeks. I had gathered all of my gear, made a list of everything I needed, and even recruited a few friends to join me. As the day of the trip approached, I couldn't contain my excitement. We set off early in the morning, eager to get to the campsite and set up our tents before it got too hot. The drive was long, but the scenery was beautiful. We passed through forests, fields, and small towns, taking in the sights and sounds of nature all around us. As we arrived at the campsite, we were greeted by a friendly park ranger who showed us to our designated area. We found a spot near a large tree and began setting up our tents. It wasn't long before we had everything set up and were ready to explore. We spent the rest of the day hiking through the nearby trails, taking in the beauty of the surrounding wilderness. The fresh air and exercise did wonders for my mind and body, and I couldn't help but feel grateful for the opportunity to experience such a wonderful place. As the sun began to set, we made our way back to the campsite to start a fire and cook dinner. We gathered sticks and branches for kindling and set about starting the fire. It took a few tries, but eventually we were able to get it going, and the warmth of the flames was a welcome respite from the cool evening air. After dinner, we sat around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. The flickering orange light of the flames cast shadows on our faces as we laughed and talked late into the night. As the fire died down, we retreated to our tents to get some rest. I crawled into my sleeping bag and zipped it up, feeling cozy and warm despite the chill outside. But as I lay there, trying to fall asleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I sat up and looked around, but saw nothing. I shrugged it off and lay back down, telling myself it was just my imagination. But as the night went on, the feeling persisted. I heard rustling in the bushes and the snapping of twigs underfoot. I tried to ignore it, but it was hard to relax with the feeling of being watched. Finally, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard a loud crash and felt the ground shake. I sat up with a start, heart racing, and peered out of the tent. In the dim moonlight, I saw a large bear rummaging through our campsite, knocking over our cooler and scattering our gear. I scrambled out of my tent and woke up my friends, shouting at them to get up. We grabbed our bear spray and flashlights, ready to defend ourselves if necessary. The bear didn't seem to be interested in us, though. It had found some food in our cooler and was happily munching away. We slowly inched closer, trying to make our presence known without startling the bear. It wasn't long before the bear finished its snack and wandered off into the woods, leaving us to clean up the mess it had made. We gathered our scattered gear and secured everything in the bear-proof lockers provided by the campsite. As the night wore on, we kept a close eye on our surroundings, expecting the bear to return at any moment. But it never did. We breathed a sigh of relief and settled back into our tents, hoping for a peaceful night's rest. But just as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard it again. The rustling in the bushes and the snapping of twigs. I sat up, listening closely, and realized that whatever was out there, it wasn't a bear. It sounded too small, too stealthy. I woke up my friends and we sat in silence, listening to the mysterious presence lurking just outside our campsite. We debated what to do next. Should we investigate and see if it was a person or some other animal? Or should we stay in our tents and hope it would go away? In the end, we decided to take a look. We grabbed our flashlights and stepped cautiously out of our tents. The rustling had stopped, and everything was eerily quiet. We shone our lights around the campsite, but saw nothing. Just as we were about to give up and go back to bed, we saw it. A shadow moving just beyond the reach of our flashlights. It seemed to be dancing and laughing, taunting us. We froze, not sure what to do. We couldn't see who or what it was, but we knew it wasn't natural. It seemed to be playing a game with us, and we didn't know the rules. We stayed there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for the shadow to reveal itself. But it never did. Eventually, we retreated back to our tents, too scared to sleep but too exhausted to stay awake. We spent the rest of the night huddled together, listening to the sounds of the night and praying that whatever it was would leave us alone. We left early the next morning because we didn't want to take any risk staying any longer.